Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started, guys. We have a lot to cover today. I want to give some time, though, before we start this week, Unit 4, which is creative writing. We're transitioning or changing from academic writing, writing an academic essay from Unit 3 to creative writing, primarily focusing on poetry. And this week, we're going to focus on our first poem, which is going to be a limerick. And we'll go into that here a little bit more here in a few minutes. But I want to give some time to answering any of the questions that maybe I either left to you individually as I went through all of you who uploaded your essay for your argumentative essay for this unit. For those of you who uploaded to your shared Word Online document, I went in this weekend and left some feedback. And I also left some feedback in Microsoft Teams. And if you go into Microsoft Teams, you should see a list of like tips under posts. Okay, so as I was coming across certain things, certain issues, I was uploading to Microsoft Teams some tips to share with everyone in hopes that this would also, maybe serve as a reminder to all of you to double check your own text. So I want to give everyone through today, because I know the server was down a couple of days, or at least one day at least, this weekend. So I'm going to give everyone till the end of today to complete the assignment. And later this morning, I'm going to upload an assignment in the virtual classroom for you to upload your Word document. So I'll ask that you upload your Microsoft Word document. You can download it and then upload it as an assignment like we did for the first draft. All right, so again, I want to give everyone the rest of all day today and tonight to complete the first draft. Please take a look, if you haven't already, to the list of tips here. And sorry, could I ask for those of you who aren't speaking, if you could please mute your mic. If you want to jump in, of course, interrupt me, stop me at any time, ask questions. I really do want this to be as participative and conversational as possible. So please feel free to stop me at any time to make a comment or a question. But so that we get a really good recording, I'll ask that you please mute your mic when you are speaking. Thank you. So here we have
teacher.
Yes.
I have a question. Sorry, but in the first, in the introductory paragraph, how many sentences do we need to have? Is that, I thought that in each paragraph we had to have from 5 to 8 sentences, but in my document you left a comment that it says that I need to have from 3 to 5 on the introductory paragraph, so I'm a little bit confused.
Right. You should have 3 to 5 sentences for the background information. Remember that the introduction paragraph consists of 3 things. It begins with a hook. Then you should discuss the context of the problem, followed by a thesis statement. So a thesis statement is 1 sentence, usually, at least for our purposes. And a hook is usually 1 sentence. So if a introduction paragraph has 5 sentences, then 3 of those 5 sentences will be the context of the problem. So usually I recommend that you think about the background of the problem anywhere from 3 to 5 sentences, because we'll add 2 more sentences, the hook and the thesis statement, to provide the total number of sentences for the whole paragraph.
Oh, okay, yeah. Now I got it. Thank you.
So I don't know on your case, I don't know exactly how I worded it, but the idea was to indicate 3 to 5 sentences for the background of the information, from the context of the problem. Sometimes I refer to it as the context of the problem, or just the problem, but not necessarily the whole paragraph. Again, the whole paragraph, 5 to 8 sentences. The background of the problem, that should be around 3 to 5 sentences.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, and
Thank you.
this is something that I want everyone to take another look at, specifically the second and the third and the fourth sentence within your body paragraph. That is, the sentences that come before the thesis statement and the sentences that come after the hook. Pay close attention to those sentences in your introduction paragraph to make sure that you're talking about the problem, whether it's an evidence sentence, right, that has a citation, or it's your own ideas, but address the problem only. Try not to address the solution. Remember that the thesis statement actually is the solution to the problem. And that's why we need a transition to begin the thesis statement, because we have already talked about the problem. So we need to kind of segue or have a transition from the problem or the context of the problem to now our one sentence solution that's going to serve as the main point of our entire essay. Our whole essay is to address the problem that we stated in the introduction paragraph. Okay, so kind of look at two things. Make sure that the introduction paragraph, specifically the sentences that come after the hook and before the thesis statement, talk about the problem. That's number one. And then number two, make sure that the body paragraphs talk primarily about the solution, right? Because the thesis statement is talking about the solution. So it only makes sense that the rest of the body paragraphs also talk about the solution, right? We don't want to talk much about the problem in the body paragraphs. Again, the problem should be stated in the introduction paragraph. The body paragraphs primarily are talking about the solution that's going to support the thesis statement. All right. So
Oh,
double.
okay. And
Yep.
I think this is going to be a silly question, but I have another one. And it's that,
Okay.
and the conclusion, well, since this essay is about saying like, okay, I have this, but this is wrong because of this, and this is wrong because of this. So at the end, the solution, the conclusion has to give like a solution, like, okay, based on everything I said before, this is the right thing, or we just need to say like, okay, so this is the information and take it as you want, or how do we need to develop the end of the essay?
All right. So the conclusion paragraph, I want you to think about the conclusion paragraph that we talked about and that we developed in the first unit, because it's going to be very similar. All right. It's pretty much the same idea as far as having three parts to the conclusion paragraph. So in the first sentence of your conclusion paragraph, just like what we did in the first unit, we want to restate and reword our thesis statement. Okay, so again, we're just reminding the reader that this is the main idea of the essay. Now, after the restating and the rewording of the thesis statement, then we need to talk about the relevance and the significance. So in your essay, since this is an argumentative essay, right, you've presented your main arguments, your objections, and your replies throughout those three body paragraphs. So in that body paragraph, this should be your viewpoints, your opinion, right, about how you're, what you're trying to persuade. It should be throughout the body paragraph what it is you're trying to argue for. In the conclusion paragraph, this is where I would like for you to talk about the significance and the relevance. What does this mean, right, in terms of the target audience? So remember that when we created our problem statement, we started off both essays, the very first thing we did was we created a problem statement. So we said something like, I wish to learn more about something because I want to find out how something happens. And then the last part, in order to, now this is the significance, in order to, now, what is the purpose and the significance of your essay? Think specifically. Are you trying to persuade public school teachers who teach children English as an additional language? Do you want to try to persuade them to use cell phones in class? Okay. What's the big idea about that? What's the relevance? How will that change the context of the school, of maybe the school culture? What's the big takeaway, the big idea? What's the moral of the story? If you want to think of it like that. What's the take home message here? How does this relate? And you can connect this to other contexts, right? As well. This is where you can start to, look more broadly. Remember that the conclusion, right, is starting from the specific to the general. So we're building through the conclusion, we're building out. We're expanding the scope of our ideas. But I want you to think very specifically still about your target audience. And this is where you can mention, don't mention just teachers. Don't just mention English teachers. Be specific. Are we talking about teachers who teach English in Mexico and teach children? Do they teach in the university? Do they teach informally? Do they teach in a business? And so think about the conclusion. And after you introduce the thesis statement, you restate it. Think about the relevance, the significance, the big idea. How does this connect to other contexts, right? And then finally, the last sentence, this is going to be your closing statement. This is going to be your final words to kind of put a bow on your essay, so to speak. It's to round it off. You might have a citation, like a famous quote, right? Sometimes, writers will end with a famous quote, but it could also be your own words. But it's kind of a closing idea to conclude your whole essay. Okay, so again, restate, reword your thesis, followed by 3 to 5 sentences that talk about the significance, the relevance, the big idea. And then the last sentence is the closing idea. It's exactly the same idea. There's really no difference between the two types of essays, except here you're still arguing for something, but you've already stated your argument, right? We're not waiting at the end of the essay to state our argument. We've already built our argument in the 3 body paragraphs. Now, the conclusion is to draw connections to your argument, right? And there's nothing wrong with repeating again what you're arguing for, but draw connections. Think of it as drawing connections to certain teachers, to the school system, to the students, to the parents, etc.
Oh,
Okay, does
okay.
that
Yeah.
does that
I
help?
got it. Yeah. Thank you. So I'm
Okay,
gonna
you're welcome.
correct my conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, alrighty. So guys, when you're finishing today your argumentative essay, take a look at each of the tips that I uploaded here in Microsoft Teams. Please also check this link. This is the Sway presentation. And this is, let's see if I can close this here. And specifically look, guys, at chapter 10. It's actually 11 up here, but chapter 10, where I have examples of references, primarily the first 3. These are going to be, for the most part, the types of references that you're going to have in your argumentative essay. So you're going to have journal articles with the DOI. This is becoming more and more common. The big change in the 7th edition was now it's in the form of a URL. Before it just said DOI colon and then a number, but now it should be in the form of a URL. Okay, so here's an example. When you're looking at your own references, please take a look at things like capitalization. Take a look at which text is italicized. Take a look at spacing. Now, the only thing that this is really not a good example of is the indentation. So also remember that the indentation should be the inverse or the opposite to the indentation that you included in the body of your essay. Okay, so the indentation is going to be the reverse. The first line is going to be all the way to the left, and then all subsequent lines within the same reference will have a 0.5 inch indentation. So double check your examples. You might have a journal article without a DOI with a non-database URL. A non-database URL, okay, that's going to be, I guess I should tell you what a database is. A database is going to be like ERIC, EBSCO, Cambridge, right? All those databases that we have available as students at the university, okay, those are databases. But if you find an article that's peer-reviewed, academic, but it's not in a database, and it has no DOI, then you need to include the URL. Okay, so again, no DOI, and it's not in one of the main databases that you accessed through the digital library at our university. So again, other than the link, everything else is the same. Pay close attention to capitalization, spacing, which text is italicized. Make sure you have the journal, the issue number. If you have one, that's optional. Make sure you have the page numbers, etc. Okay, so this is an example of, again, a journal article without a DOI from a non-database URL. And then the third type that you're likely to find is a journal article, magazine, or newspaper without a DOI, but it comes or you find it in an academic research database like ERIC, EBSCO, Cambridge. Okay. If you find an article there, then it's not required. A URL is not required. Okay. And we don't have a DOI, obviously, so there's no DOI URL, but you don't even need the permalink. Okay. So it's just as if you had the physical article in your hand, right? And you don't have to include any kind of link whatsoever. And here are two examples. All right, so these are going to be the main three types. Now, I know some of you have theses and dissertations, and again, double check. I've tried to include most of the common examples or the common types of references, so you can scroll through here to look at the examples. Again, all these examples are pretty accurate except for the indentation, so be careful with indentation. Single space within, double space between. All right, and also take a look at the plagiarism policy. All right, and be really careful with sentences, for example, that start out like several studies show, or the literature supports, and let's say that you finish that sentence. What do you need to have in that sentence? You need a citation, right? When you say several studies show, or authors suggest that blah, 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 well, we need the citation. When we reference authors or studies or the literature, we must have a citation, right? So that we know which studies we're talking about. If you say several studies show blah, 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 but you have no citation, well, the reader's going to question, well, which studies are you referring to? I don't know which studies you mean. I want to go look and check out those studies to see whether or not I agree with what you're saying. All right, so be really careful. This is where we can accidentally commit plagiarism simply by not including a citation when we need one. Okay, so double check that. I've included the policy here as well, our departmental policy on plagiarism. So please review that and obviously ask. The best thing to do is ask if you're not sure, right? Ask either in class or send me a message, but make sure that you're really careful about each sentence. Take each sentence one by one and ask yourself, is this sentence my idea, an original idea, or is it not? And if you answer it is not an original idea, this is not your original idea, then we need to have a citation. That's really the question here, right? Is this my idea? And it's not common knowledge, I should say, right? It's not common knowledge, and if it's not, and if it is your original idea, right, then we don't need a citation. All right, so I'm not going to go through all these tips. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at those tips. If you have questions, I can open up some questions right now. If you guys have some questions, we can talk about it. Or of course, you can also reply either here under post, or if you want to send me a chat message, of course, you can do that. Any questions about the tips here? Basically, any questions at all about the argumentative essay that you're working on to complete for today?
Everything's clear, teacher. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So if there are no more questions, then I want to take us to week 13 in our virtual classroom. And today we're starting, as I mentioned before, creative writing. And specifically, we're going to be looking at poetry, how to use figurative language. We're going to be talking a lot about this week and the next 4 weeks about figurative language, because we've heard over and over, we can't use metaphors, we can't use slang, we can't use colloquialisms, idiomatic expressions like phrasal verbs. We can't use those, right? All these rules about not being able to use all that great language in academic writing, which is true. We can't use that. But now, with creative writing, and especially with poetry, we can use those. We can use phrasal verbs, slang, metaphors, similes. We're going to be looking at all kinds of examples of figurative language, because we want to start using figurative language when we develop our creative writing. We don't want to write literally, right? Imagine writing poetry about getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth, combing your hair, right? I mean, yeah, maybe you can make that interesting, but it's really difficult to talk literal about anything and really have some sort of interesting and meaningful message behind it. This is why we have figurative language. This is why we use metaphors, because we can think about ideas in a different way. We actually phrase it in a different way to compare it to what we actually want to say. And sometimes metaphors is the best way and easiest way to even communicate, right? When we speak, we use a lot of figurative language. And so poetry, and starting today, we want to start thinking about how to use these different examples of figurative language. Again, we'll get into the different types a little bit later. But what I wanted to do was start off by showing you some examples of limericks. This is going to be our first poem. Now, I should say now that for each of these assignments, we're going to basically do 4 different types of poems. And each of the poems, we're actually going to do a poetry reading. So it's going to be basically like this. We're going to work together to create a text that's going to be our poem, and then we're going to need to read our poem. All right. Part of writing poetry is being able to read it. And so every poem that we write, there's going to be a writing component and there's going to be a spoken component. So I know that our class meets super early at 8 o'clock, and imagining writing a poem at 8 o'clock in the morning or presenting a poem is, I know, a scary thought, right? But I'm going to ask that the next 4 weeks that we're going to need to have a microphone, and I'll leave it up to you if you want to turn on your video or not. Again, I know it's 8 o'clock in the morning. I hope that you do have a video, because it's always better to see your faces and interact, being able to have that visual element, right, to our conversation, right? I think it just makes it that much more enjoyable. But I will leave it up to you. I'm not going to require that you turn on your video at 8 o'clock, but I do want to make sure that all of you have at least a microphone, because again, for a grade, all of our poems that we're going to create are going to have a written component, which we'll continue working online, but also a spoken component, which will, for the most part, probably need to happen in our live sessions. Okay, so a microphone again will be required. So I know some of you are using your cell phones, and your cell phone will be perfectly fine if that's what you're using to access the live sessions. If you're using a computer, just make sure that make sure you either have a microphone in your computer, or if you have an external microphone that you can use, that you can get your hands on one if you need to. Okay. So the first video, I want to show some examples. We have this guy, Edward Lear. He is basically, I would say, the grandfather of the limerick. He really made the limerick famous. And so let me see if I can open this up here. And let me know, guys, I'm just going to play a second, just if you could let me know if you can hear the audio from the video. Can you hear that? If someone could just
Yes.
No,
confirm.
teacher. Oh, well, I didn't hear anything. I don't know if it's just me.
Okay, anybody else hear
I
it or
heard
not
like
hear it?
a bell. I don't know if it is correct, teacher.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes, I heard like a bell.
A bell, right. Okay. All
Yes,
right, I'm
me
going to go
too.
ahead. All right, and if anyone else, hopefully everyone else could hear it, let me, just jump in if you are not able to hear the video. There was an old dairy down dairy who loved to see little folks merry. So he made them a book, and with laughter they shook at the fun of that dairy down dairy. All right, in this first example, hopefully you can kind of hear like a rhythm. In fact, limericks are really good to put to music. You probably have heard a lot of Irish limericks, right? Because they have kind of a rhythm to it, and they have a pattern. And this is the rhythm and pattern that we're going to focus on this week. Let's look at another example. There was an old man with a nose who said, "If you choose to suppose that my nose is too long, you are certainly wrong. That remarkable man with a nose." All right, so looking at this example and looking at the pattern here, what do you notice about these two examples that we've seen so far? If you had to list some characteristics of a limerick, and we've just seen two examples, what do you think?
It rhymes many times.
All right, so what do you notice about the rhyming pattern specifically? What rhymes?
Where it says old man with a nose, choose to suppose, and again, man with a nose.
All right, so, and this is kind of difficult to see the way it's written along the bottom of the screen, But how many lines do we have in a limerick here? If you had to count the lines.
We have 3 lines, teacher.
All right, so again, I know this is kind of a trick question. Yes, there are 3 lines here.
5?
Right. So there are 3 lines literally. You are correct. But for a limerick, there's actually 5 lines. And I want you to pay close attention to the commas in this example. So the first line, there was an old man with a nose, comma. So that's going to be your first line. Who said, if you choose to suppose. That's going to be the second line. That my nose is too long, comma. This is going to be the third line. You are certainly wrong. Fourth line. That remarkable man with the nose. And this is going to be the fifth line. Okay, so when you're writing a limerick, all right, you're going to write at least one stanza. We call this a stanza. A limerick stanza has 5 lines. All right, so this week we're going to be creating one limerick, one 5-line stanza. Right now, if you want to create more, some students get really into it and they have 2 or 3 or 4 stanzas. That's fine. Some students will create a long poem having the same idea and have 2 or 3 stanzas, or some will do completely separate poems, different ideas. Right? That's also an option. So it's really up to you how you want to approach the limerick. All right, but we need to try to include at least one limerick. Now we have 5 lines, and of those 5 lines, which lines should rhyme? And when we say rhyme, the very last word of the line should rhyme. So in this case, which lines, 1 through 5, which lines should rhyme?
First, second, and fifth, and second and third. No, third and fourth. Sorry.
That's correct. That's right. All right. So in your notes, make sure that you write down the lines that should rhyme. First, second, and fifth line should rhyme. And lines 3 and 4. In this case, nose rhymes with suppose, rhymes with nose. Now, in this case, right, in this case, what I would like for you to do is try to avoid not repeating the same word to rhyme. All right, so you have nose, doze, rose, right? So when you're creating these poems and you have to deal with poetry that needs to rhyme, one of the suggestions, one of the strategies that I always make to students is to create a list of words that rhyme, and just make a list. And they could be, words that have nothing to do with the poem. They could be silly words, words that really don't even make sense. But it's to kind of brainstorm and come up with some options of words that you could later decide whether or not they fit into your poem. Okay, but here are some examples. Now, anything else that you notice about, if you had to state some characteristics of a limerick? So we know that a limerick has 5 lines. We know that a limerick should rhyme. The first, second, and fifth line, and the third and fourth lines should rhyme. What else do you notice? Let's look at one more example here.
There was an old man on some rocks who shut up his wife in a box. When she said, "Let me out," he exclaimed, "without doubt, you will pass all your life in that box."
All right. Let me try to go back here to get the.
Pass all your
All right, so here's another example. Other than the rhyming and the 5 lines, what else do you notice that's characteristic of a limerick?
Teacher, sorry, but can you specify what is a limerick?
Okay, so a limerick, what we're doing is looking at examples. Okay, we're going to spend all the rest of the class figuring out what a limerick is. And so instead of me just telling you everything, what I'm asking here is for us to look at some examples first and see if we can come up with what a limerick is. What I'm asking to see if we can decide together what a limerick is. All right. So far we know that a limerick has 5 lines. We know that a limerick should rhyme the first, second, and fifth line, as well as the third and fourth line should rhyme. Okay, so far we know that about those 2 characteristics of a limerick. Okay, now
Oh,
what
okay.
else? All right, what else do you notice about these examples? This example here that we're looking at, and the examples that we've seen so far. Anything else that you notice?
They all tell like a short story or a situation.
All right,
Well,
and
that's what
what
I see.
kind? Yeah, so it tells you a short story or a situation of something happening. Absolutely. And what else about that, Elizabeth, that or anyone else? What else do you notice about the kind of story that's being shared here? We've seen 3 examples. What have you noticed? What kind of stories are being told here? Are they serious stories?
No, they are kind of silly.
Yeah, they're silly stories. So this is another characteristic of a limerick. They should be fun. They should be silly, crazy stories. They should be stories that make you laugh, right? These aren't a love poem, right? These aren't poems about death and destruction. No, these are fun stories or funny stories. They're silly. All right. So this is another characteristic of a limerick. All right. Is yes, it should tell a story, but not just any story, but a silly story, a fun story, or a funny story. Okay. All right. Very good. What else do you notice about the characteristics of a limerick? Let's look at another one.
Your life in that box. There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her. But she seized on the cat and said, Granny, burn that, you incongruous old woman of Smyrna.
All right. Anything else that you notice? Let's look at one more.
Old woman of Smyrna. There was an old person of Rheims who was troubled with horrible dreams. So to keep him awake, they fed him with cake, which amused that old person of Rheims.
So what do you think? What else do you notice about these examples of limericks? What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure if it's like a characteristic, but I think that most of the all of the sentences has the same time tense. For example, all of them are in past simple, I guess.
All right. So certainly the tense, the verb tense is important when telling a story, right? So in this case, right, they're talking about the past tense was troubled, and but notice that they changed the verb tense here. So there's really no rules that are specific to limericks when it comes to verb tenses. And there's nothing wrong with changing the verb tense from the past to the present, to the present to the past. Just as we've seen here, this is a good example. Okay, so we really have freedom to decide as we tell the story which verb tenses we want to use. Okay, so really there are really no restrictions to verb tenses, but we do need to pay close attention to verb tenses, again, in the sense of just telling a story, that it makes sense to change the verb tense within the context of the story. But what do you think? Let's look at one more example here. Let's look at this one.
An old man on a hill who seldom, if ever, stood still. He ran up and down in his grandmother's gown, which adorned that old man on a hill.
All right, so definitely, right, this is a funny story. All right, we can imagine the guy running in a gown, his grandmother's gown, no less. And it's funny, right? It's supposed to be silly. But what do you notice about this line? And I'm going to read the first line. There was an old man on a hill. The second line, who seldom, if ever, stood still. What do you notice? What do you notice about the way in which I am saying those two lines? There was an old man on a hill.
It has a rhythm.
All right. It has a rhythm. Anybody else? What else? There was an old man on a hill who seldom, if ever, stood still. What do you notice?
The voice?
The voice. Specifically, what? What about the voice?
How you're speaking, like if you were singing or something like that.
All right. So one aspect of it is, we'll call it intonation, the highs and the lows. So there was an old man on a hill who seldom, if ever, stood still. So notice the intonation of my voice. Da 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 da. Third line. Da 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 da. Fourth line. Da 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 da. Fifth line. Da 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 da. That's the intonation. All limericks follow that intonation. Within a stanza, 5 lines, they all respect that same intonation. This is why limericks work really well for songs, because it's almost like you're singing it. It almost, you can kind of hear the music maybe in the background by the way the voice is going up and down through each line, but each line's different. First line, da 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 da. Second line, da 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 da. Hear my voice, da, like ups and downs. This is what we're going to be practicing when we write our own poem, not just write it out on text, but to speak it. All right. And we need to follow the rules of the limerick, right? We have some limitations, and part of the limitation is, well, we've got 5 lines. We need to tell a silly story. We need to rhyme. We need to be careful of our intonation, our highs and our lows. Now, there's another aspect of the voice that we also need to focus on. There was an old man on a hill. What other aspect related to voice besides intonation should we pay close attention to when we're writing and speaking our limerick? Who seldom, if ever, stood still. He ran up and down in his grandmother's gown, which adorn that old man on a hill. What do you think? What else do you hear in the voice? Besides intonation. Da, 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 da. What else do you hear? Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da.
Maybe
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
sorry. Maybe that you are making. Maybe we have to say the words like a little bit slower and like slower or yes.
Okay. Maybe, right? Certainly the way that we, and in fact, when we speak our limericks, one of the mistakes that we make is we try to go too fast. So definitely we need to try to slow down when we're speaking, when we're actually reciting our limerick. We want to make sure that we slow down because we don't want to lose any word. Every word in a limerick or every word in a poem is gold, right? We don't want to lose one word of the poem because every word contributes to the message, right? So that's certainly a good observation. We need to slow it down when we speak and when we practice reciting our own poem. But what else do you notice if I say da 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 da? What else with regard to my voice do you notice besides intonation? Da 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 da. What else do you notice?
The pitch,
The speech?
the volume pitch.
All right. How about the stress? We'll call it stress, word stress. All right. So thinking about the first line, da 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 da, how many syllables in the first line? Da 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 da. In that example, how many syllables?
Eight.
Da 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 da. How many do you hear? You can use your fingers if you want. Da 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 da.
Well, I think it's a syllable per word. There was an old man. Like each of them is one only syllable.
All right, so let's I stopped sharing my screen for now, guys, and I want you to just listen to, I'm just going to do like a da 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 da. All right, and I want you to hear how many syllables that I use in these examples. Here's the first line. Da 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 da. How many syllables? Da 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 da.
7.
Seven.
7.
All right, here's the second line. Da 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 da. How many syllables?
7 also.
All right, here's the third line. Da 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 da.
5.
Here's the fourth line. Da 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 da.
Also 5.
And the fifth line. Da 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 da. How many?
7.
7.
7. So here's another characteristic here that I would try to use. Now, the syllables, the number of syllables, it's not like every limerick absolutely has to have 7 only. But I want you to use this as a guide to try to stick to, because it's going to make it easier when you go to try to speak it. If you have one with 8 and 9, maybe even 10 syllables to try to speak it, either is going to be impossible or it's going to be so difficult that you're not even, you know, you won't be able to pull it off. So first line, first, second, and fifth line, 7 syllables. Lines 3 and 4, 5 syllables. 5 syllables. All right. So in the chat, I've stopped sharing my screen. I'm looking in the chat right now. What's one characteristic of a limerick? So the question is, Omar was asking, so what is a limerick? All right. So now we're going to answer that question. So what's one thing that we know about a limerick? And just type it into the chat. And Liz, I'll come back to your question here in a sec that you posted in the chat. So what's one aspect of a limerick? If you want to type it into the chat. Silly stories, absolutely. Fun stories. What's another aspect? Silly stories, right? And they may be short or they could be long. If you have a lot of stanzas, it could turn into be a really long story, right? So, but certainly a silly story, a fun story, or a funny story. It's composed of 5 lines. And what do we call 5 lines? Of anything, of 5 lines of any poem, not just a limerick. What do we call 5 lines
Stanza.
of? And how do we spell it? Here's a stanza, right? Stanza. Right, good. What else? It needs to have rhythm. And specifically, what about the rhythm? What more do we need to include in a... So rhythm or rhyme. Okay, rhyme. And which lines rhyme? Okay, lines 1, 2, and 5 should rhyme. The last word of lines 1, 2, and 5 should rhyme, and the last words of lines 3 and 4 should also rhyme. Very good. What else? When we talk about our voice, there are 2 aspects that we need to try to include for each line as we build and create each line. The sentences have the same syllables. All right, which sentences have the same syllables? And how many syllables do they have typically? Okay, so lines 1, 2, and 5 should have how many syllables? And how many syllables? All right, 7. And how many syllables in lines 3 and 4? 5. Da 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 da. All right, what else? Da 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 da. Da 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 da. With regard to voice, there are 2 aspects that we need to pay close attention to when we are reciting a limerick. What are those 2 aspects of your voice? Besides the number of syllables, there are 2 other aspects. Intonation and word stress. Remember, intonation is simply the highs and lows. Da 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 da. Right? Though that's word stress, the highs and lows. And when we practice saying our own limerick, we need to exaggerate. We need to really bring out the highs and lows of our intonation. And then word stress. Da, 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 da. So the first line, da, 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 which syllables are stressed? We have 7 syllables. Which syllables are stressed? Da, 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 da. in the first line. Da, 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 da. Which syllables are stressed? 1 through 7. Da, 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 da. Any ideas? Da, 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 da. The second, the fifth, and the seventh. Absolutely. That's right, Mariana. Da, 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 da. Second line. Da, 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 da. Same. That's right. And then the da, da, now with the third line. Da, 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 da. What do we stress in the third line? Which syllables? Of all 5 syllables, what do we stress in line 3? Da, 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 da. Fourth line. Da, 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 da. Which syllables are stressed in lines 3 and 4? Da, 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 da. Which syllables are stressed in lines 3 and 4 of a limerick? Right, that's it. Second and fifth. All right, so these are the aspects, the characteristics of a limerick that we're going to be working on for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, we'll review again the limerick. We'll look at a few more examples, and I'll give you time tomorrow to begin writing. If you want to begin writing now, then I would certainly recommend that. If you feel you're going to need some time with this, but I will give you some time to work on a limerick in class tomorrow, and also give you some time to practice. It's very important that all of you have mics. All right. So part of receiving a grade for all of the limericks is not just writing, but also reading it out loud. Okay. So make sure that you have a microphone that you have set up, and so that we can also hear your poems. All right, guys, I think we'll stop there. We went a little over today, but try to finish up your, in fact, do finish up your essays. I will be creating a space in the virtual classroom where you can upload your assignment. It should be up in about a couple of hours from now, so you can begin uploading your assignment for Unit 3. All right, we'll stop there, guys. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see everybody tomorrow. Take care.
Thank you,
Bye,
teacher.
teacher.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.